are there things that crop up in your space that are kind of interesting problems that impact machine learning?
You have to deal with a lot of data which is low quality in terms of the resolution, but also in terms of all these artifacts that might appear like disease if it was disease. And
Right.
you have to build a lot of very robust models that help identify these conditions, especially in dentistry. It's present in other healthcare fields as well, where diagnosis, there's a lot of variation in diagnosis in general. Computer vision really comes into play for us, and especially what Overjet does, which is quantify disease.
Wardah, welcome to the Super Data Science Podcast. I'm so excited to have you on. Where in the world are you calling in from?
So I'm in Los Altos Hills in California.
Nice. Is it beautiful this time of year over there in the springtime?
Pretty much, yeah. It's beautiful most times of the year.
Lucky. I don't know. I could be working anywhere now since the pandemic. We've decided to not go back to offices. We have an office, but we only use it occasionally. For some reason, I'm just still stuck in New York. I put up artificial walls around why I can't go somewhere beautiful like California or like Colorado or just enjoy the outdoors. I just look at cement all day. Maybe that's what I like. So we met in New York, actually. So we met at the Scale Up AI conference, which was held by Insight Partners in New York, and it was walking distance for me. So I live downtown. I was able to walk over to that conference, and we met at lunch. So you were getting ready to go on stage and speak, and I was just interrupting you while you tried to eat, and found you really fascinating and asked you to be on the show, and you said yes, and now here you are. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Jon.
So you're the co-founder and CEO of Overjet. Overjet has raised $79 million from the likes of Insight Partners themselves, from Crosslink Capital, from General Catalyst. So it's a really fast-growing venture capital-backed company using machine learning, using artificial intelligence to innovate in the dentistry space. So I understand that the name Overjet itself is kind of an inside term that dentists use, but I don't know what it means. Can you elaborate on what Overjet means?
Yeah, so Overjet is a dental term. So basically, your top teeth are in front of your bottom teeth for your bite to close properly, and that distance is around 2 to 3 millimeters. So if you don't have that distance between the top and the bottom, your bite is not going to close properly, and you're going to have pain. If you have it too much, then you have buck teeth, where people might make fun of you. So it is about the precision of dentistry, where you need to have millimeters matter a lot, and even the 2 to 3 millimeters matter. So we, chose the name primarily looking at the precision in dentistry and how measurements really matter.
Cool. That is a really good name choice. So Overjet is a clinical intelligence platform driven by machine learning for precision dentistry, as you say, as the Overjet name belies. So you've mentioned in other interviews that the lack of agreement on treatments by particular dentists makes dentistry more of an art than a science. So how can machine learning used by companies like Overjet improve this situation and turn dentistry into more of a science?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, Jon. So, especially in dentistry, it's present in other healthcare fields as well, where diagnosis, there's a lot of variation in diagnosis in general. So, two dentists looking at the same information might disagree with each other on what they're seeing. A lot of it is because it is, they're eyeballing distances and measurements, they're making subjective decisioning. And this is where computer vision really comes into play for us, and especially what Overjet does, which is quantify disease. So at Overjet, we actually quantify disease rather than just detecting disease. So, for example, if we're talking about bone loss, it's a measurement. That's a bone level above a certain threshold, and once you can measure it, now you're talking about we both can agree anything above say 2.5 millimeters will be considered bone loss, and once we measure it, there's no subjectivity there. So what we're doing at Overjet is we're quantifying disease that helps us make very objective decisions that help us make better decisions for the patients themselves, and that helps move the industry more towards a science, and also move towards more evidence-based dentistry as well.
Super cool. I love that. So it's not just classification. We've, as machine learning practitioners, we see lots of examples, even in kind of early machine vision problems and data sets that we work with. We're often working with classification. So, is there a tumor present in this tissue or not? In your case, it could be, is there a cavity present in this image or not? And so Overjet goes beyond that. It's not just image classification, it's quantification. It's saying, yeah, how many millimeters of bone loss do we have?
How large is the
And
cavity? How does that interact with the rest of the tooth, for example? Similar to like, or you do detection as well, right? So you'll say, okay, is there a cavity in this particular area? That's one. But then we go a step further and we say, how large it is, how it relates to the anatomy, how much of that crown area of the tooth has been decayed, so we can actually get to very accurate decisioning based on the measurements.
that's super cool. Sounds like it would be a tricky machine learning problem. I guess we'll get into that later in the episode, particularly around getting sizes accurate in images, that kind of thing. That comes to mind to me as something that would be tricky when we label the data. Um, so, as a specific kind of example of a specific kind of dental disease and how Overjet can make an impact, I'm aware that every year there are 3 million cases of periodontal disease in the US alone. So that's about 1% of people in the US are diagnosed with periodontal disease. In an interview last year, you mentioned that periodontal disease is likely heavily underdiagnosed. And so, what are the drivers for this underdiagnosis, and what role could data and machine learning play in identifying those currently undiagnosed cases?
Yeah, no, it's a here periodontal disease. According to the CDC, it's more than 40% of the adult population above 30 years has periodontal disease. So
Oh,
we think that's a little more than what's actually what we see in the data. So I think probably CDC needs to update these metrics. But if here on one side you're saying it's 1%, what we're seeing in the practices is around 5 to 7%, but the population that we're seeing that has the disease and should be treated is much higher. So it is
right.
one of probably the most underdiagnosed diseases in the US, particularly, but also in the rest of the world. And why is it so important? Is that periodontal disease is also linked to diabetes. It's also linked to cardiovascular health. So it's basically an infection in your mouth that leads to an inflammatory response, and here it causes other immune system to go a little haywire as well across your whole body. So it is something that is very important, and it has been well studied why it's so important to actually not only diagnose but also treat. But it is going underdiagnosed. Here where Overjet comes into play and computer vision helps is first is we need to be detecting the disease. I started the conversation with bone loss, for example, and that's one of the most important metrics when it comes to measuring periodontal disease. It's after after the infection has been there for a bit, your bone you start to have bone loss that could lead to tooth loss and other issues as well. And when you're eyeballing this, even if the tooth is slightly, is aligned differently, you might one person might say there's bone loss, the other person might say there's no bone loss. There's
Mhm.
also in this diagnosis, there's also the hygienist involved and the dentist, so there are two parties involved, and they're also taking other like hundreds of other measurements when they're making this diagnosis too. So there every practice we've entered into, yes, the practice does underdiagnose the disease, and where Overjet helps is we identify for every patient every measurement that is needed to make the diagnosis. And if we find some of the data which is present and other might not be, either has not been collected, we can flag them to collect that. If all the information is there and the treatment has not been identified, we will flag that for the practice as well to look at and help determine whether there's periodontal disease.
Whoa. So not only does the Overjet platform just receive information and help with diagnosis based on that information, but it can also provide feedback to the users. So it can say to a dental practitioner, hey, we are missing a piece of information in order to be able to make this diagnosis properly. Please obtain that information and provide it to us.
Yeah, no. So here exactly, not only do we identify disease or quantify disease, but we also first help make sure that the right data is present. So the right protocols are being followed, the right data is present to make the diagnosis. And if there's some indication of disease and the complete data is not present, we will highlight that to the dentist or the hygienist, whoever is in the office, to be able to collect the right information so that we can provide a complete uh, diagnosis and treatment planning option as well.
That is super cool. Do you have any other kind of informative use cases, Warda, of how machine learning or data science plays a role in the Overjet platform for preventing or identifying some kind of dental condition?
Yeah, so I think the way what Overjet does is we look at every condition that can be found on 2D X-rays currently, and we are also working on the other formats in the future.
Cool.
But here, one of the important use cases or applications for it is actually in the insurance space. So not only do we work on the practice side to help practices perform better, but we also help insurance companies run their operations more effectively as well. And
Right.
currently, they, for example, process all this information manually. So you have dental reviewers who look through the data. So if, say, you go and get a crown or you need a crown, your dentist is going to submit that information to the insurance company. The insurance company is going to have a dental specialist and then a dentist look at it. The dental specialist will say, is this the right information? The dentist will say, okay, if this is the right information, is this the right, is there medical necessity? And if the answer is no, they'll not pre-authorize the treatment. If the answer is yes, and you have the condition, they will pre-authorize it as well. This is all very subjective. It takes a long period of time, and it's very costly. And Overjet and AI here solves this issue and automates this process so that it can happen much faster, much more cheaply, as well as more accurately, such that these are objective decisions being made.
Super cool. This episode of Super Data Science is brought to you by Z by HP. Get rapid results from your most demanding datasets, train data models, and create data visualizations with Z Data Science machines, which come in both laptop and desktop workstation options. The Data Science Stack Manager on these Z by HP machines provides convenient access to popular tools and updates them automatically. So this helps you customize your environment easily on either Windows or Ubuntu. Find out more at hp.com/datascience. That's hp.com/datascience. All right, now back to our show. I wasn't aware of that application space, but that makes a lot of sense. Being able to not only automate and improve diagnosis in the dental office, but also allow the dental insurance companies to be streamlined as well.
Yeah,
Super
and
cool.
and with that, like, I think that's been our that was our claim to fame actually when we started off. So right now we're serving about a majority of the top carriers, representing about 100 million members. So that is half of the US population's data is going through now Overjet's
Wow.
platform in order to make a determination on whether the claim is appropriate or not.
That explains the amount of money you've been able to raise, Warda.
Yeah.
So, are there any particular kinds of challenges that you deal with that are particular to the problems that you're tackling? So, are there things that crop up in your space that are kind of interesting problems that impact machine learning?
Yeah, so I think bunch of one of that which you mentioned earlier as well, which is that variation of diagnosis, and why that's a problem is not just because we're helping solve it, but it's a problem when we actually annotate our data as well, right? So if three dentists look at the same condition, one might say a certain thing, another might not, might say another thing. Here, there are different approaches to it, right? You can try to get a consensus. You can have like multiple dentists agree, then you can have a oral radiologist try to get a consensus. Or you can actually use all the labels and feed them into the models and let the models learn what is the right information or where you might have a lot of disconnect there. we've tried different approaches, and interestingly enough, we're actually finding that which we haven't seen much in the literature, but we're finding that just not going through to a consensus, but just actually feeding a lot of this information to the models and like letting the models learn has gotten us better results. And what we do make sure is, of course, we have to make sure all the labelers are well calibrated and they're reviewing based on the guidelines that were provided, etc. as well. Another thing very interesting that we have to deal with is the quality of the data as well. As I mentioned, we deal with insurance data, and insurance data is 70% of it is digitized, so that will come in a digital format. 30% of it is basically
Mhm.
analog data that has been digitized in some way or other, where they've actually scanned it, that they might have then printed it out on a paper, they might have folded it, then they would have put a tea or a coffee mug onto that page, then they would have scanned it again and sent it off to the insurance company. So you can't be sure what you get at the end, the other side. So we have to deal with a lot of like data which is low quality in terms of the resolution, but also in terms of all these artifacts that might appear like disease if it was disease. And we
Right.
have to build a lot of very robust models that help identify these conditions, but also crop these things out, rotate them, make sure that they're oriented correctly, make sure that the data is in the right format for us to actually make any kind of diagnosis or quantification that we need to make.
Cool. Yeah, that does sound like something challenging. So, how do you resolve something like that? How do you deal with a coffee mug stain artifact in an image?
So sometimes, of course, like if it's a lot of times it might be on the, there might be an X-ray image on a paper, and there might be a coffee mug on where there wasn't the image, so you can actually just crop it out. So we have models which detect where the actual information is, and everything else kind of gets cropped out, and where we can determine that. Or just like we build, we have to train with a lot of data as well, to be able to, and a lot of noisy and messy data as well, to be able to learn these different artifacts, and that they don't matter. So it is a challenging problem, and we heavily rely on augmentation, etc., to make sure that we can
Gotcha.
create different conditions as well. But it is something very interesting, and something we have to deal with all the time.
Yeah, data augmentation seems like a great way of overcoming the issues in that kind of scenario. And yeah, it sounds like lots of big challenges and lots of data for data scientists and machine learning engineers at Overjet to be working with. So there might be some listeners out there who are thinking it would be a pretty cool place to work. And I'll have more information for them later on in the show. For now, I'd like to stray a little bit away from technical machine learning questions to kind of a general question about Overjet, which is what was your experience as you began providing tools to the dentistry industry? So, were you kind of welcomed with open arms, or was there a lot of hesitation to what you're doing, to automating what has historically been a manual industry?
So previously, I was in the medical imaging space, so MRI data. And when you are dealing with AI for MRI, radiologists are threatened. So they're threatened for they believe that AI will take their jobs, and if you look at it, there's some truth to it, right? Which is the fact that that's what they do. They look, radiologists' main goal is to diagnose on radiographic information. Um, what what's different about dentistry is dentists don't think of themselves as radiologists. They
Right,
think of themselves as surgeons. So
right.
yes, they diagnose on X-rays. So they'll spend some time, maybe a minute or two, when they're with you while you're in the chair, to look at that information. But most of the time they spend is either chatting with you to explain that information to you, or they're spending drilling in your mouth or doing some kind of surgery. So the interesting thing is, which is unique about dentistry, that dentists, the way dentists perceive themselves helps us in terms of they think of all these things. If if technology can help them do these things, they do accept it with more open arms than you might see in the other healthcare fields. So that's been an advantage to us, and just in general in dentistry as well, because you have had less technologists focused on it. They do feel that you need more technology in dentistry, and good technology. They've had technology which is, it seems like it's from the 90s, etc., and software. And now when they see exciting, cool tools, they're actually gravitating towards it. So in terms of timing, I think it couldn't have been better for us. Where at least for now, we haven't had that kind of resistance that I saw in the medical side, and that helps us, of course, sell more easily into these companies, but also for them to use it so that they can actually improve the lives of people as well.
That's awesome. And I'm so glad to hear that difference. It hadn't occurred to me that there would be that difference, but as soon as you explain it, how the dentists have this broader range of functions than just doing diagnosis of images, that's actually just a small portion of their job. And so if you can make that part of their job easier, then they can focus more on surgery or on bedside manner, on dealing with patients and helping them get through what could be a traumatic drilling experience.
Mhm.
Um, so you mentioned there working previously with medical diagnostic imaging with MRIs. So was that at QBio?
Yes.
So yeah, so that was another startup that you were involved with prior to Overjet, and that's a company focused on simulation and quantification of human physiology. So, how is your experience at QBio helpful for co-founding your own startup and running your own startup later on?
Yeah, no, I think it was a very interesting experience. It was the startup was started by a second or third time or founder. That meant funding was easier, other processes were easier. But what I learned, I think, from that experience was how important it was to hire great people, and how you had to go out of your way to hire those great people.
Mm,
So even, in this case, even though it was founded by this third time founder whose last company was a firm worth, I think, billions of dollars, he still liked to recruit me. He flew all the way, had a chat with me while I was still like right out of school in that sense. But he felt that was important for the company at that time. So I think that was my biggest takeaway from the company, and I think that has helped us succeed as well, because for me, once we identify who we need to hire, then I'm going to go out of my way to make sure that we hire them, and that has led to the success at Overjet as well.
cool. That has been a recurring theme recently on the episode. We've had a number of guests recently who have said the big driver behind their startup success was hiring the right people. And so, yeah, it's great to hear you reinforcing that message here again today. And I love that idea of, especially in this world where we've gotten used to now being able to stay home. If the CEO of a company flew out and came to see me in my city, I would instantly think, wow, this person really does see me as the future of their company, and I should really be seriously considering this opportunity. That's great. That's really good advice. Um, so, in addition to the many patents that you filed at Overjet, and no doubt the innovation that you were involved with at QBio, you've made inventions in other fields as well, Warda. So, as an example, during your PhD at MIT, you you worked on autonomous microgrids. So, this is a solution to helping people who lack access to electricity. So today there are about 900 million people on the planet that do not have electricity. And so it sounds like these autonomous microgrids that you were involved in the development of could play a role in ameliorating that situation. And I know you have some experience with this hands on because you ran field tests in rural India. So I think you're the right person to ask. How do microgrids work and how could they solve this electrification problem?
Yeah, so when started off on this problem, there were 1.2 billion people who did not have access to electricity. I don't think we actually got it down to 900 million, but there has been a lot of work in trying to electrify the areas which don't have access to electricity.
Mhm.
Microgrids in general were basically an interconnection of electric systems, which could help provide electricity in a very low cost manner to the areas where the autonomous piece came about, because we were not only identifying what were the loads and the sources, so that means the solar panels, or what were the kind of loads such as lights or fans, etc., that were connected onto the system automatically, and then helping control what is called demand response, like helping control the demand in such a way that we can best utilize the resources such that we maximize the use of electricity. And the cool thing about these systems were that they did not need any planning. So, for example, if you look at the grid system in the US or any developed world, it has gone through a lot of planning. That's because it was done back in the day, where you needed all the planning to really structure everything. But could you have, with the current technology, could you have self-learning grids where you could understand what was happening, who was getting connected, what source was getting connected, and then re-architect itself to provide the best electricity,
Whoa.
and at a low cost. The interesting thing is, this actually not only is a problem in the developing world, but it got used in Australia and other areas as well, because microgrids are more important. Especially after you've seen the California fires and electricity
Mm.
shortage, etc. So you have
Mhm.
grids which can be disconnected from the main grid, and then self-function and self-regulate the power there as well. So at ULink, where we were, not only was I doing my PhD, but we were also commercializing this technology, and working with um, uh, both developed world power systems as well, but also in the developing world, where we helped electrify some villages, where we would go and install these systems and help provide the electricity there, and prove basically provide a proof point on how low electricity can cost if you actually did not have to build for that much robustness, but you actually built for maximizing the time that the load was available.
Wow, that sounds like such impactful work. So you were doing that during your PhD. Was this related to your experience of the Harvard Innovation Lab?
So no, at Harvard Innovation Labs, that's where Overjet got started. Uh, so uh,
Oh.
So after finishing my PhD, I was more focused on clean energy, and that's where the microgrid work came about. But I realized that I really wanted to work in healthcare as well. So after finishing my PhD, I did a postdoc in healthcare at CSIL, working on how to use wireless signals to detect breathing, heart rate. And use machine learning on that to identify different issues of medical conditions or other issues that might be identified. So I made a conscious effort moving from clean energy towards healthcare, and that was the transition I made. And then when Overjet started, we actually got incubated in Harvard Innovation Labs for the first 2 years, and that
I
was an
see.
amazing opportunity.
I see. So let me try to recap. I'm probably going to get some part of this chronology wrong, but you can correct me where I get it wrong. So while you were doing your PhD at MIT, part of your research was on these autonomous microgrids, and you co-founded Ulink Technologies to commercialize those autonomous microgrids while you were doing your PhD.
Absolutely.
Got that? Okay. And then after you finished your PhD, you did a postdoc at the renowned CSAIL lab at MIT. We've had a number of guests on the show from CSAIL, most recently Professor Tim Kraska in episode number 571. He was talking about collaborative no code tools that he had developed for data scientists at CSAIL and was now commercializing. So CSAIL, yeah, one of the best known computer science and AI labs in the world, if not the best known. And so you were there doing a postdoc after your PhD. And that allowed you to make a bit of a transition from the electricity work towards healthcare.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then from there, from that postdoc, you made the jump into a healthcare startup, QBio, which we talked about. So that was the company working with medical diagnostic images with MRIs. Um, so, what caused you to make that jump? How did you make this transition from academia into the entrepreneurial space? Was that something that you kind of always knew you were going to do?
Yeah, no, I really wanted to have an impact and have an impact in my life. And academia is great, but a lot of the things, take a long time to manifest in the real world. And for me, the most exciting thing is when something I build is actually gets utilized.
Right.
And because of that, I always was, even while I was doing my PhD, very attracted to entrepreneurship and doing things on the side and trying to commercialize different ideas, etc. Because I think that's just been what's gotten me very excited. And then there was a pivotal time where I had to decide, whether academia or industry, and I gravitated towards more trying to have more impact in the near short term future.
That resonates with me. Having done a PhD and then gone into industry, I completely understand how, yeah, things can sometimes, not always, but can often feel like they're moving a bit slowly in academia. And yeah, it certainly doesn't happen very often that an academic raises $80 million to be scaling up their uh, dental machine learning startup. So I can see why you went down the path that you did. And you certainly are making a massive impact, Wardah. It's awesome to see. Um, so then after QBio, you then got involved in the Harvard Innovation Labs program after that, yeah? And so did you go into that Innovation Labs program with this dental machine learning idea in mind? Or is that something that came out of the incubator experience, out of the Innovation Lab experience?
No, so we went into it with the idea in mind. So I basically, the way it started was I went to a dentist, and the dentist gave me a treatment plan, which was very different than what I had received before. And that got me interested in dental diagnosis and why there was this variation. And I asked for my x rays and started understanding, reading X-rays 101, and realized that there was a huge variation. If you go to 10 different dentists, you're going to get 10 different opinions, and wanted to solve this. So I left QBio knowing that I wanted to work in dentistry, knowing I wanted to help improve the care that was being provided. And then I started working on Overjet, and the idea started forming more. And then we applied to Harvard Innovation Labs with the idea. I don't think it was like completely, evolved to where it is right now, but at least we knew what we were trying to do.
Cool. And then, so what's that like? I guess let me actually ask the question in two parts. So it sounds like you keep saying they prior to applying to the Harvard Innovation Lab. So you selected co-founders, I guess, before you applied to the Harvard Innovation Lab. So how did you decide on who your co-founders would be?
So one of my co-founders, we had just worked together at QBio. So I knew him. I had worked together with him. He was heading computation. I was heading product side. So we knew we worked together. He had gone off to work at Amazon after that. And so I started, as the idea started to form more and more, I started connecting with him, and we started brainstorming more about it. And then the second person was a dentist, so which was of course needed in this process as well, and
Mhm.
who was also from MIT and Harvard. So we had some connections there, and that's how it came about.
Nice. And then once you got into the Innovation Lab program, what was it like experiencing that? How was it helpful for getting Overjet rolling?
Yeah, so I think for us it was very crucial. First, because we did not have funding, and we got a space to work at, and this is pre-COVID, so you didn't want to work at home as well, and you wanted a place to work. So we had a place to work, but also there was mentorship around it. And I think what I really loved about the innovation labs was the fact that they actually, rather than focusing on teaching you entrepreneurship, they were focused on enabling you to do your startup more effectively. So anything that you needed to make that happen, whether it was some sessions that were happening that you could just attend, or there were VCs coming into the iLab to think through your ideas, etc. So that you were surrounded by other people who were doing the startups as well, who were not just it wasn't a school project for them, and to make it better, there were a lot of people around you who were helping you support and build your idea further too.
Nice, nice. That sounds like an amazing curriculum, and no doubt had a big impact on your ability to develop and scale Overjet effectively. I also noticed that when you were doing your MIT PhD earlier, you minored in entrepreneurial management. We had a little bit of a conversation about this before we started recording, so I thought it might be fun to reflect your thoughts on air. So, while doing that MIT PhD, you minored in entrepreneurial management at the Harvard Business School, which is renowned as it's probably the most prestigious business school in the world to be able to get into. And so it sounded to me like that could be a super valuable program for helping you get going with any startup. But it sounds like you might think real world experience is actually a lot more valuable than learning about entrepreneurship in the classroom.
Yeah, and so I think that this is something that I because I was always interested in entrepreneurship, and with being in school that long, you actually want to learn as much as you can as well. So I did take quite a few entrepreneurship courses, and what I realized was at least they were very focused on the early stage, like the idea refinement, etc., or just like thinking of it on paper. And I think, especially with entrepreneurship and starting a company, the real challenges and how you have to overcome them, and how you have to still go, even if on paper something doesn't look right, even then still going forward with it and believing in it is so much more important. And that was something that I felt that lacks in school, but but it's, I think, something that is getting improved with things like Harvard Innovation Labs, where they give you an opportunity to really build out your company forward. That some other schools can also like leverage and learn from.
Nice. I love that answer. So, for people who are listening who might like to get their hands dirty in an entrepreneurial opportunity and see how it works, if people want to join Overjet as a data scientist or a machine learning engineer or maybe some other role, are you doing any hiring, and what do you look for in people that you hire?
We're absolutely hiring, and we and I think as we have a high bar in terms of the people we want to hire, but we have many roles open. Even if you don't see it on the website, we are hiring for any and every role related to data science, machine learning, computer vision, natural language processing, which we didn't get into, but that's also some things we do. So please do apply here. What we really look for is people who not only are good at that particular skill set, but also have ownership, like want to take ownership of the problems. We are a startup. That means that ownership piece is very important to us, and also like believing. Especially people who believe in the problem that we're trying to solve. And I think if you have the three, I think you're a sure shot fit for Overjet. Even if you don't have, I think when people join Overjet, they fall in love with the mission that we're trying to try to achieve here, because I think it's something that's extremely needed for healthcare and for everyone, including us, because everybody gets impacted by poor oral care if that's the situation.
Everyone's got a mouth, everyone's got teeth. Yeah, so the three things that you look for are the technical skill set, obviously, in for whatever the role is, data science, machine learning engineering, maybe NLP engineering. The second thing is taking ownership of problems. And the third thing is believing in the problem being solved. So, we didn't talk about natural language processing earlier. I didn't know about that aspect of what you do, but the show isn't over. Let's squeeze it in. How do you get natural language processing involved in dental care?
So not only do we actually look at images, that's one type of diagnostic data that's present. We actually look at the dentist notes as well. So
Of
these are
course.
narratives, short form, not grammatically correct, and all the issues that you have in healthcare notes that we have to deal with, and we process that information not only on the practice side but also on the insurance side to make better diagnosis, because not all information might be present in an X-ray. So, for example, like a fracture does not, you don't see it in an X-ray, but that might be written in the note. And this is dentist writing these notes, so it does not appear as the right spelling and the way you would see it. It appears in all different ways, and you have to deal with that kind of language as well.
Nice. I'm glad that we squeezed that answer in. But yeah, now we are reaching near the end of the episode, so regular listeners will know that it is getting close to that time when I ask for a book recommendation. So, Wardah, is there anything interesting that you've read lately that you can recommend to our listeners?
I think the book that had some impact on me was Being Mortal by Atul
Mm,
Gawande. I think it's a deep read, so I won't. It's not a light read, and I think you probably can do it over a holiday or something, because it really makes you think and really makes you think about your life, and especially the last phases of it. Where
right.
even if you're not going through this, you have family members who have gone through this, and people you love, etc. So it is a book that makes you think about life more deeply.
That sounds like a really good recommendation. It is something that yeah, I think on deeply from time to time. And I had many years ago, one of my best friends did a course at university on grief, death, and dying, and it was quite off-piste relative to the other things that he was studying. And he would not shut up about how valuable taking that course was for his appreciation of life and yeah, being mortal. So that sounds like a great recommendation. All right. So, Wardah, you're tremendously successful. You are a brilliant speaker. You're working on amazing AI problems and scaling them up, making a big impact across the world. So, I'm sure there are lots of listeners out there that would love to hear more from you. So, how can they follow you online?
So thank you for that, John. So I am on LinkedIn and Twitter at Wardah Inam, and my first name, my last name. So those are the two areas that people can connect with. You can also email me. It's my first name at overjet.ai. So happy to help.
Nice. Amazing. Thank you so much, Wardah. Thank you so much for being on the program. And maybe we can catch up again in a couple of years to see how Overjet is doing, or maybe how your next venture is taking off. We'd love to hear from you again sometime in the future. Thank you so much for making the time to be with us on the show.
Thank you, John, for having me.
Wardah is so cool and such a smooth communicator of advanced topics, be they technical machine learning topics or practical commercial ones. In today's episode, Wardah filled us in on how, thanks to painstaking labeling efforts and image augmentation, Overjet is able to not only classify dental images but also quantify aspects of them, for example by identifying how many millimeters of bone loss there are in a given tooth. She also talked about how Overjet's technology is used not only by dentists, but also by insurance companies, demonstrating how one AI platform can be useful across multiple industries. She talked about how AI solutions can reduce the underdiagnosis of common diseases like periodontal disease, how AI-driven autonomous microgrids can enable the lights to stay on in areas that have been disconnected from the primary grid, how getting involved with startups could enable you to make a bigger impact with innovations than an academic career, and how she looks for data scientists and software engineers who exhibit technical know-how, take ownership of problems, and demonstrate an interest in the problem her company is solving. As always, you can get all the show notes, including the transcript for this episode, the video recording, any materials mentioned on the show, the URLs for Wardah's social media profiles, as well as my own social media profiles at superdatascience.com/579. That's superdatascience.com/579. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd greatly appreciate it if you left a review on your favorite podcasting app or on the Super Data Science YouTube channel. I also encourage you to let me know your thoughts on this episode directly by adding me on LinkedIn or Twitter and then tagging me in a post about it. Your feedback is invaluable for helping us shape future episodes of the show. Thanks to my colleagues at Nebula for supporting me while I create content like this Super Data Science episode for you. And thanks, of course, to Ivana Seabird, Mario Pombo, Serge Massis, Sylvia Ogvang, and Kirill Eremenko on the Super Data Science team for managing, editing, researching, summarizing, and producing another super cool episode for us today. Keep on rocking it out there, folks, and I'm looking forward to enjoying another round of the Super Data Science podcast with you very soon.